Welcome to the Primitive Republic podcast. First off, I apologize. It has been a while since I've put out an episode. I've been in the mountains for a few weeks, and I just have not gotten around to doing all this. I've been slacking. I apologize. But this guest I had recorded with, I believe it was in August, and he's a super awesome guy. Keeps bees. He takes bees out of people's houses just like I did. Actually, I had somewhat learned from this guy through his videos and stuff like that. And he was unintentionally mentoring me and didn't even know it. So I hope you guys really enjoy this. He is a firefighter. He's actually at work, so in his downtime, he's actually nice enough to record this podcast. We've got a little bit of interference and stuff like that. I hope you guys can deal with it. Some like popping, and you can hear a little bit of the background noise, but hopefully you guys get all the good stuff from this podcast. So sit back and enjoy. Welcome back to the Primitive Republic podcast. I have a special guest on, a guy that I've kind of idolized for a few years now, not in a creepy kind of way, but because I remove bees, for as long as I have, this guy and his videos and all that kind of stuff is one of the guys that really got me started out with it. His name is Travis Ulbrich. Some of you may know him a little bit better as Yappy the Beeman. And you prefer to be called Travis or Yappy?
Well, it depends. We're not doing a beekeeping podcast. We're a hunting podcast. I don't know. I guess we should call me. What are we going to call me? Travis the Birdman?
Well, I mean, we can talk about really any of it because this podcast, my whole podcast is about hunting, conservation, the outdoors. It's kind of all inclusive, which really fits pretty well with you in this niche. I mean, we could talk about anything. So, I mean, shoot, we could talk about it if you want. So, whatever you
Yeah.
want to identify as they say nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. Here, we'll cover both bases, and I'll be Yappy the Birdman.
There you go. That works.
This is the funny and it's completely family friendly to a degree, but I've done honeybee stuff probably 9 going on 10 years, and I'm known everywhere about dealing with bees. Well, when I started getting into the bird stuff, people started asking me, said, "What did so you can be a bee man or a bird man?" And I said, "Well, during the summer I got bees, but during the fall and winter I'm going to be doing bird stuff." I said, you know, and then all the time I'm a fireman. As a fireman, we're knower of all, master of none. And this kind of fits right in there because now I'm the knower of all, master of none when it comes to the birds and the bees. So, all said and done with, I've got all the bases covered. I just don't know where I'll take it from here in the future.
So, yeah, I definitely understand that. Yeah, but so what got you started out? I guess in all of it. I mean, because you started out like you said with bees, and I've known your videos for quite a while now with bees. But
Well,
how did you get started in all this?
it's a great question. I get asked that a lot, and I did it just like everybody else did. The before bees was that my wife and I got into wanting to take a medicinal medicine class. There's a man local to us that his name is Daryl Patton, and he goes by the Southern Herbalist. And he, ever since he was young, followed under another gentleman that taught him how you can walk out in the woods, what trees that you can eat leaves off of, which trees the bark will make medicine or teas out of, plants on, out there. Think, just everything. It was an overall of nature's put out there, and we just look at it as something to be decorative or have to mow or bush hog every once in a while. But there's so much of those things that are out there that are actually medicinal, or will even provide food for us. If there was nothing else out there to eat, you would never starve if you understood. Well,
Right.
and
Absolutely.
so we started taking that class, learning kind of what really weren't going down the prepper point of view, but it was kind of in that range as far as what we were doing and why we were doing it. And if everything all of a sudden went chaos, and we needed medicine or we needed food, this is what was going to cover it. Well, we got into talking about honey and the properties of honey, as far as the things that it can do for us, because a lot of people don't realize how medicinal honey is.
Oh yeah.
During World War II, I believe what it was, they the U.S. government actually collected up every drop of honey they could in this country, put it in drums, and they would send it overseas, because they could take honey and basically put it on a bandage and put it over wounds, and it would help heal wounds just as easily as having to give them medicine and doing all kinds of different things. We might see this a lot, and I've seen it through like some Facebook posts where when there's like heavy flooding, and you've got livestock like horses that will stand in water for days at a time, it actually can bother their skin, and people have gotten with horse rehabs and sent them honey so that they can actually help rehab horses, because of the problems that they get during the mass floodings. Well, there's a lot of medicinal properties for a lot of things out there, and like I said, when we got into the honey side of it, it just kind of struck a chord with me that I wanted to get into beekeeping. We had chickens, we had a couple of pigs that we kept put up, to rotate into the freezer. We even did, with some friends, we'd rotate a cow here and there, and so it just fit right in with what the program was. Well, um, got interested in it, met a few beekeepers. They kind of helped me out. And one of the guys in the class had a beehive in the back of his barn wall. And he offered to, let me have it if I wanted to come and get them. So I had made arrangements to go and get the bees out of there with a few of the beekeeper friends I had. And here's the joke, and I've told them this, and I've actually talked about this in other podcasts, where these guys are great and they're wonderful beekeepers, but they were horrible when it came to being bee removers. They sadly taught me every single thing not to do in doing a bee removal, and I wanted to find a better way. And then I started just scrounging through YouTube and finding videos. And one of the people that I come across was one of my per se mentor, and I guess you'd say an idol in the business, was JP the Beeman.
Yeah, JP is great.
Well, started following his work, and he doesn't really give tutorials, but he just shared what he was doing. He was one of the first original people that were really kind of getting into the beekeeping aspect of YouTube, and those doors opened up. Well, he I made contact with him. We started talking, and I got invited to go to uh, I don't know if I wanted to call it a weekend beekeeping gathering. They called it the Bud Gatherings, and it was over in Mississippi, which by the it was about, I want to say it was about 3.5 hours from my house. He invited me to come down one year when they were having that, and I jumped all over it. So we went over there, got to meet him, got to meet Xiao Wei and a few other people, and really just got to be great friends with them. About a year later, he invited me to come down to New Orleans and actually work with him for about a week to get him caught up in some of the jobs that he had. He had a bunch of real big jobs going on, needed an extra set of hands. And you know, when you're the one person who you idolize the most and have sponged everything that he's put out there, and it actually invites you to come get involved. Well, shoot, you jump all over it.
Right. Yeah.
So I spent a week down there, and we had so much fun. And we just realized, how much we clicked when it came to having fun and doing the bee stuff. He taught me kind of like on fast track stuff that he had known and learned over the course of 10 years. He was teaching me with every job. So um, I
Information overload.
I mean, I he and he picked up on the fact that there was a lot of the stuff that I was very good at, but also open to understand. I didn't read a lot of books about beekeeping when I got into this, and I had the basics and understanding the, what you're getting into when you open up a box, what things were what, this is a queen, this is a worker, this is a drone, this is honey, this is brood, the cycle. So I knew how the workings of a beehive went. I just didn't understand how to rehome them, is what we call it. And uh, he taught me a lot, um, on how to pay attention to the actions of bees and what they'll do in reacting to what you do. And it really helped to kind of, like I said, fast track me into the removal business. And that's probably been 4 or 5 years ago that we done that. And kind of fell into getting into some of his videos. We've had a ball in making videos down there. And it started me up on a channel, so I got my own channel up. And what else? Got involved with some of the Facebook beekeeping groups, and was asked to help admin some of them, just based on temperament as well as knowledge, and being able to
Hmm.
control the crowd. And then now it's all of a sudden it's you know I'm not a household name, and I'm humble about the whole thing. I mean, it just amazes me that people actually will sit and uh, listen to some of the things that I like to share. But it's humbled me a lot. But I love it so much to be able to share this stuff with everybody.
Oh yeah. I mean, like I said in the very beginning, I mean, watching your videos, JP, um, Jeff Horchoff, Mr. Ed, um, it's 628 Dirt Rooster, you know, all you guys, that's kind of how I started out. Um, but you're absolutely, and I got into beekeeping before I really got into the medicinal side of things. And it's, funny you had mentioned the wound thing. They told us about it in the military, and I was like, I was a little bit hesitant to try, but I had cut my finger with a hole saw, obviously by accident, uh, accidentally doing something stupid, and and I was like, I wonder if this works. So I put it on there and put a bandage on it, and I'm not even joking, a week and a half, and it was like nothing had ever happened. I mean,
Right.
it
It's
worked
got
great.
Yeah, it's got great antibacterial properties about it. And um, you know, it's an amazing gold liquid product that it has so many different properties about it that we've heard. And I know plenty of older people that are around me that they've been taking a spoonful of honey and a swig of apple cider vinegar every day all their life, and they swear it keeps them healthy. And I can understand it because of what all is actually in the honey. And this is what gets me. I don't really get all scientific into it, but you got to think about this. You know, our grandparents, um, they lived pretty good, healthy lives. Once medicine kind of got up there, and then the doctor's like, "Oh, your cholesterol's too high," or "Oh, you're too fat," or all this and that. But they lived good, healthy lives, because the majority of what they got came out of the ground.
Yeah.
Their vegetables were real vegetables with real minerals, with real things in it. And that's the same thing what honey is. It's just a liquid form of what we're eating, or what they used to eat, as far as food goes because all that nectar is just the nutrients that are coming up out of the ground. The bees take it, they convert it with the enzymes, that they've got in their gut, and turn it into a little thicker product. But the everything about honey, real, we're talking natural honey. We're not talking, some of this, import stuff. There is a
Yeah, I was
big
going to
difference.
ask you about that too.
But yeah, I mean, there there's so much about it that I think that a lot of people know, but we still haven't even tapped the reality of how good it is for us.
Yeah, I fight that. You brought up the import thing. I fight that tooth and nail, uh, telling people, look, and because I don't filter my honey. I'll strain it. You want to get a lot of the bee bodies and all that kind of stuff out,
Yeah, yeah,
but I don't filter it. And you'll see like some of these big suppliers and stuff like that, they'll actually run it through a ceramic filter. And so that way it's all nice and golden and it looks clear and all that kind of stuff all the time. And, they'll pasteurize it and all that kind of, I'm like, all these people are doing is killing all of the enzymes and the properties that you need. And let's not even mention China and what's going on with Asia, importing fake stuff, you know. And I get a lot of people, they're like, well, I have honey, I eat honey by the gallons and stuff like that, and it doesn't seem to help my allergies. And I'm like, well, what are you getting? Where are you getting it? And they're like, well, I just go to the grocery store and I buy such and such honey. I'm like, well, chances are it's probably fake, first off. Secondly, it's probably been pasteurized and filtered so much that you're not even getting the enzymes. And thirdly, you're not getting it from a local source of whatever pollens and stuff like that you need from the plants that are around you. So if you've got an allergy to something, you need to be getting something that is around you so your body can build up a tolerance to it. And that's what honey does. And they're like, no, no, honey is honey. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not
right.
created equally.
Well,
But
a lot of the Chinese import stuff, they're basically taking corn syrup and they're adding flavoring to make it taste like honey. That's they may take, and it may be um, to a 55-gallon drum, it may be 2 or 3 gallons of honey. The rest is corn syrup with a lot of flavor additives. I don't know how they mix it, but it's not honey.
yeah,
Um,
well, and the
and
scary thing is they'll throw a label on it. Well, they'll run it through another country, and then it'll be a product of Belize or a product of Vietnam or something like
right,
that. So it
yeah,
doesn't even say China.
right,
You know,
and well, when we're dealing corn syrup, I mean, corn syrup you can buy it for a dollar a gallon. I mean, hypothetically,
right?
where a gallon of honey is going to cost you a lot of money on on the market side. Real honey that is made, produced by local bees and jarred by a beekeeper is going to cost you somewhere between $6.50 to $8 a pound. Now, it sounds kind of weird how we sell it by the pound, and it'll have the ounces or however much was on that jar.
Yeah,
But
thank you FDA for that.
yeah, getting all nice and screwed up. But on average, um, honey is actually sold by the pound, and you're getting in a pint jar, depending on where you top it off at, you're getting somewhere around a pound to 1.3 pounds of honey. That's the average that I see personally. Okay, and I sell in pint jars. I used to sell in quarts, and on a quart jar it would be just about double that. You were about 2.6 pounds, pushing almost 3. But
Yeah, I get about 22 ounces per pint.
yeah,
I think is what I'm at.
yeah, and there's specifics like you can buy the honey bears, you can buy
Yeah, yeah,
what else? There's specific bottles that can be bought and labeled that will actually accommodate the weight side of it, where it'll say, you'll pick it up and it'll look and say 1 pound of honey. But anyway, on the as far as the honey part goes, um, yeah, there's a lot of ways that the Chinese imports kind of get into this country, and there are a lot of even U.S. companies that will cut their honey with imported or corn syrup or whatever. So
See, I didn't
knowing,
know that.
yeah, and it's, you're never going to hear it, but I knew a guy that was um, he sold honey on the commercial side. It's to the degree it's local, but he's in my area, and he's a good friend, and we got to talking about this very thing one day. And now this is, I don't know this for law, so just kind of bear with me, but it's my understanding that you can have up to 14% of anything else, which basically would be filler in your jars, and it still be called, pure honey.
Wow,
Um,
I did not know that.
so if that be the case, then these guys can figure out, that 14% math and stretch that out just a little bit further. Um, you
Well, you
know,
think about it. Look at the profit potential. Well, and I say I'm looking at it in a capitalistic form, I guess, but um, 14% is huge. You know, 100 pounds of honey, and you're selling it for $6.50 a pound, give or take. Let's say $6 a pound for easy math. That's $600, right?
right.
Now, you just added 14 pounds to that, basically at 14%.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's pretty big. That increases your profit quite a bit
it
if
could.
you're doing
It could.
something like that. Now, it's shady as crap,
Right. And
but
I part of that 14% is kind of the buffer for, and it's that buffer for when you've got, let's hypothetically say a commercial beekeeper takes his bees out and puts them on almonds, okay? But when he gets them out there, he's got to, he they're they're putting them out there a week or two before almonds actually start blooming. They're getting everything set up, but they've actually got to feed those bees. So those
right.
bees are going to get out there and they're going to start taking in sugar water. Well, there's a lot of debate. I'm not, I won't get into it as far as whether, a sugar water that goes through the bee system and then gets put up in a cell and capped off as honey is actually honey or not. But you've got that 14% window that can balance on whether or not it's actually a full 100% nectar collected, put back up, and turned into honey, versus having a percentage that was actually just sugar water that was on them that they were using to feed. So there's a balance that's in there, and I would have thought that if that's the case, they went down that road with the 14% to cover the base of saying, well, this was because of feeding, not because of cutting. And I know a lot of good commercial beekeepers that don't play that game, and but there's always somebody out there that's got to stretch profit. So who knows?
Yeah, that's, I don't know. I guess I understand that, but at the same time, yeah, you're right. It's a big
Well,
debate.
and here's
But
another angle. You've got your commercial guys. I know a lot of them, and they are 100% on the up and up. I mean, they run through their system, and they put stuff in drums. When those drums get sold, it's out of their hands. I mean,
yeah,
they're just bringing the supply. But when you get to the profit guy, the guy who's got to put it in the bottle and start making money, then there's another. There's all kind of good and bad in the systems. It's just, if you really want to buy honey from somewhere, always try local. If you can't get local, then at least look into the company that you're going to buy of, and kind of see how it goes from there. But
well, and
same,
that's the other thing too. Like, I urge a lot of beekeepers to really make a presence. Try and stay up with the times and stuff like that on in technology and all that kind of stuff, and at least do something. Like Facebook. Something.
showing, hey, look, you're a beekeeper. That way people see it. I don't know about you, but my honey goes pretty quick. Uh, because it's natural, it's local, it's, that kind of thing. I have, gotten it to several other states and stuff like that. But for the most part, I don't even get a chance to do that because people want it so bad. They want a good product so bad that, I mean, they just gobble it up.
Oh yeah, I get it's my personal the way I do things. I always tell people you got to have a management program. If you got one or two beehives in your backyard, or you got 25 beehives in your backyard, you got to manage those bees. Everything you do is part of a management process. Well, um, I personally don't harvest my honey until generally around somewhere in September.
Hmm.
And the reason I don't is because I like to maintain my livestock. Um, Bees start out early in spring; they start building up, and man, they just take off and get going. And part of there's processes where if you're sitting on a real high flow um, uh, source, that you can end up having to pull those boxes off and go ahead and sling that and then put them right back on and then keep that process going. But at the end of somewhere around mid-June is when all that dries up. Once
Hmm.
you start seeing the leaves are all full on the trees and the flowers have all put on their pretty petals and everything else, a lot of that flow's drying up. Well, a lot of beekeepers will tend to take and pull their honey around June because they've got to get that they got to get that stuff in the jar to get it to the stores or to their friends or whatever. I don't pull mine until September. And the reason I don't is because I don't have to worry about feeding my bees all
Yep.
winter. I don't have to
That's
worry about feeding
exactly
them
what
at
I
all.
was about to
I
say.
mean summer. So I can go through all through summer, not have to feed my bees, and then as soon as the dearth is done and that fall picks back up, then we do real good as far as pulling the honey then, or going ahead and leaving that to so that I can keep them from dying off in the winter time, or in the going through winter.
Right. And see, to me, that does a couple of days. I do the exact same thing. Now, it's harder when you're rehoming bees and stuff like that. Obviously, it's a little bit different. You're catching them in the middle of the summer or, whatever. And so you end up with a feeding pattern and all that kind of stuff that you end up having to do. But for my established hives and stuff, it does a couple different things. One, it increases profitability on that hive because I'm not having to feed them. I'm not having to go out there and manage them nearly as closely because I know, hey, look, they've got a super on there that's, completely full. That's easily going to last them the summer. And then when they hit that fall honey flow, which normally happens in the southeast, you know, they they end up building it back up. They build up that plus whatever they've lost over the summer. So it increases profitability in that aspect, but at the same time, it keeps me from having to do a crap ton of extra work
Yeah.
just with
Well,
feeding.
there's a lot in debate. I read into a lot of different studies as far as what they thought was the draw for the Varroa mite to be on the bee and why they were killing the bees. And there's plenty of information that was out there that says, well, the Varroa mite is actually coming in and it's spreading viruses through the bees. And I mean, there was a list 5 years ago when I was teaching this stuff about how there was 21 or 22 viruses at that point in time that were
Wow.
causing the bees to be ill. Now, what they didn't get all of them, but they were getting the viruses were basically being exposed by the Varroa into the bee during that summer months when their numbers really started, getting up there and and they were getting strength, where the bees were actually not producing as much when it came to their numbers because the food source was less because of dearth. Well, in all of that, it made sense in the math that the viruses were gaining, that was making the bees sick. And what I would teach is that the the analogy I would use is, you think about, you've got all your bees that are being born through basically fall flow, somewhere around September and October. All those bees that are starting to be hatched out in that window are going to be the bees that have to get you through winter. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if they're covered up in Varroa and they're getting all these viruses, then it would be theoretically, it would be like you living off grid. You've got you've got to go out today in a snowstorm. You've got to find a deer. You've got to kill the deer. You've got to harvest the meat and bring it back to the house. Cut the firewood, all right, and get the fire going to cook it, and do all of these things while you have pneumonia and the flu.
Yeah, that
Okay,
makes
so
sense.
if you can't get out of bed to go hunt, you're going to starve. Well, in the weird correlation to it is that the bees in the wintertime, their main job is just to create enough heat to keep the cluster warm. So if this big ball of bees is all clustered up, and all those bees that are on the outer side are having to take their turn with creating that heat, but they're so sick that they can't create that heat, then they try and they try, but then they weaken and they fall off and fall down to the bottom and die.
Yep.
Right, but the next bee takes that spot, but it's sick. And here you are. This is what gets me. In the beekeeping side, people go into winter, man, and they got bees busting into the seams in their hive. But then all of a sudden it comes about February. They get that first nice little window, 2 or 3 days of warm, and newer beekeepers can't stand it. They got to go out and check, look in their box, and they see that they've got almost no bees. um, this baseball sized little cluster, and they're froze in their spot and dead. And they say, my God, what happened to all my bees? Well, the general answer is most likely it was mites. But we were trying to figure out, how can we keep that from happening? Well, my management program turned into saying, well, I'm not going to pull honey right there in June. They've collected it. They need to get through. Why do I want to go ahead and feed them crap food when they've got all this good food so they can stay strong up until fall? Once fall gets here, now I evaluate, how's my rain and how's my fall sources looking. One of the biggest sources that we get in the Southeast is going to be a goldenrod. We've got about 64 varieties of goldenrod in Alabama alone, and that in our band that crosses all the way through Georgia over into South Carolina, we've all got the same pretty much stuff. And that goldenrod, if it's dry and hot, the pollens that come back are junk. There's not really anything good about that pollen, and they're barely getting enough nectar off of that goldenrod to make it back to the hive. And actually, by the time they start sharing it, the bees in the hive are sitting there going, thank God we got a little something to wet our whistle, because there's not really a good flow because things have been dry. But now if we've got a good rain and the ground is moist enough for the plants to absorb it and run it up through and turn it into nectar, well, then we're going to have a flow and we're going to have a good source. So I evaluate my program of saying, okay, I'm looking at what's out there and how moist is the ground, how much rain have we got. I kind of watch the bees when they come back, and I look inside the hive every once in a while and see, are they putting up good, or are they just barely putting any up? If they're barely putting anything up, they're going to hurt if you take what's left of the honey that they put up from spring.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say it doesn't hurt my feelings not one bit to not, to tell my customers I didn't harvest anything this year. It's been too dry. But then I've got people that, they're saying, well, Joe got, he got 55 gallons off of his hives. Yeah, well, that's great for him, but he's going to spend a whole lot of money trying to feed his bees sugar water all through
Yep,
summer. I mean,
absolutely.
all through winter, and and we'll see if they make it through winter, healthy. But
Well, and
anyway,
there's other things too. There's microclimates and, all that kind of stuff in different areas. You could be in one little section and it seems like the weather seems to always catch, these one little sections, but this other section over here seems to barely ever get any rain. And
right.
and if you're in that area, well, I mean, I'm sorry, it sucks for you. But, maybe you should consider talking to a local farmer that's in that band that always seems to catch rain or something, you
Yeah.
know? Um, but yeah, I mean, you're right. And I think this is just a theory, but if there's all these antibiotic properties to honey, don't you think it's a little bit better for the bees as well if they're eating their own honey because it has those antibiotic properties? If they're sick and they're down and out and stuff, maybe it's better for them to be eating that. I don't know. What do you
Well,
think?
here's the really weird quarter. Oh, I agree 100%. And touching that, this is what's really weird. I started this telling about how we were actually looking into getting into the medicinal medicine stuff, right? Well, there's plants that are out there that will produce very highly potent medicine for different ailments, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's stuff that's actually out there that's just real good for eating, but not really so much for medicine. Well, if you think about this, where do the bees get the nectar? From all of those plants. They're not just going.
Well, it looks like we lost Yap. Hey, buddy, can you hear me?
Yep, okay, I'm back. We'll have
All
to
right.
edit that part.
Yeah, no problem.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah,
Uh,
there we go.
okay, so if all these different plants are medicinal plants in one form or fashion, the bees are gathering nectar from that, then everything about what they're gathering is medicine for us. And I agree, yes, it could be to a degree a healthy medicine for them, but completely different biology and reaction to the body and everything else. And I'll give you an example. Oxalic acid, okay, there's a
Yep.
lot of debate about treating versus non-treating, okay.
Yep.
Now, for the record, 3 years ago I treated every single hive I had out in the yard,
I,
and that was
I almost never treat mine.
right, and that's okay. But here's where this weird figure it out on your own comes from. 3 years ago, I treated every hive I had out there because I was getting mite counts that were about 20 per 300, which is on average for those that don't beekeep. When we take about 300 bees, we put them in. I personally, my method is I put them in a jar. I shoot a little bit of starting fluid down in it, which is an alcohol or an ether, and it immediately dispatches the bees and the Varroa. But what you do is you take that and then you shake it up really hard, and you loosen the Varroa from the bee. Well, as that Varroa falls off, it just happens to be so small and lightweight that it sticks to the liquid that is on the side of the jar. And what you do is you turn the jar sideways, you roll it, and you got a marking spot where you say, okay, well, here's where I start, and I turn the jar, I count the Varroa until I get back to that mark. Well, when you've got about 300 bees, a good hive, you only want to see one or two Varroa. You'd hope to not see any, but they're going to be there. So you count one or two. You got a healthy hive. You don't have an overabundance, and they should do well. If you get to the window of about 5 or 6, you're pushing it. But if you get to 7, 8, 9, you're at threshold.
Yep.
Threshold meaning that this is, we've got way too many cinder blocks sitting on our chest and we can't breathe.
Well, and
Give
and
me
for
one.
for those who don't understand what a varroa mite is, imagine a giant tick the size of your head sucking on your body.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly what I would refer it to. Is I mean, because that's they're I mean they look just like it. If you ever see one, they've got all them little legs, they got that little flat disc body, and they're generally red. And bees don't have red blood. They actually, I think it's yellow. They have hemolymph, but nothing like what we do. But yes, they look like little micro ticks to our eyes, but so you do that balance. Well, I treated everything I had 3 years ago, and that fall, um, I left all their honey on, and I treated right before fall flow, but I let them keep everything they had, and generally in wintertime I do. But everything came back really strong. I didn't lose any hives that winter, and I thought, hey, this treatment stuff's pretty good. Well, the next year I didn't treat at all. I'm going into my third year right now. I've still got I keep an average of 25 hives in my yard. I've still got 25 hives. Now I got two of them that are weak. I'll have to do some adjustments on that, but 23 hives that I've got sitting in my yard that have not been treated since they were established, and they're doing fine. And one of my personal theories on it is because they're not getting sugar water, they're not getting the junk food to help support them. So take that for what it's worth.
Well, and that goes back to you personally. I'm on a huge anti-sugar kick myself, right? Now, I still use honey, so I guess it could be said that yes, I am getting sugar through honey, but for the most part, I cut out a bunch of carbohydrates, a bunch of man-made sugars, stuff
Right.
like that. And man, I've felt amazing, like compared to, and you don't know how good or how bad you feel until you've actually felt better.
Till you start feeling good again.
Yeah, and
I know.
then when you supplement back with the sugar and everything, I can tell, like, I feel like crap when I supplement back. And I think it's probably got something to say with the fact that, hey, we're getting crap in our food. So if we're eating junk food, then I'm sure other animals are the same way, which actually brings me to this. What do you think about CCD and um, the pesticides and GMOs and stuff like that?
Oh man.
This is heavily debated, but
Well, and before we run off that one, let me add just one little thing back to finish off kind of what you were saying about the sugars. There's a new study that's probably been out for the last year, that they're actually, this study is and it's very convincing, that what the problem is with the feeding the sugars to the bees is that they're actually, the Varroa are eating off the fatties cells off the bees, not actually off their hemolymph. So you
mm,
know if the sugars are even causing the bees to be fat, you know the if you take a glass of sugar water and you take a glass of honey water, the everything is natural that is in that glass of honey water, as long as it's not pasteurized, come from junk honey. But I mean, a real jar of honey, you take a tablespoon of one and you take a tablespoon of the other, the the way that they refine the sugar, and there's nothing about it that has anything natural, or there's no minerals that came out of the ground that are going to go along with that. And and so comparing the two, you can eat honey all day long, which there's a little chart out there that says you can take 1 cup of honey will actually equal the 2 cups of sugar that you would have to put in a gallon of tea. That's your balance difference and how much it would take of one and the other. But one of them is actually, you're taking in that sweetness, but everything about it is actually nutritional.
hmm.
So
Do
that,
you remember what that study was for the Varroa, the Varroa mite eating the fatty tissues and stuff?
Man, I would have to dig in and look it up. If I can find it, I'll make sure I get it emailed to you. Um, and hopes that I'll hopefully try to find that, and maybe you can put it in show notes or something like that if you've got links for stuff in there. But I'll
If
try to get
not,
that to
I'll
you.
if not, I'll talk to so I did a removal, I don't know, a little while ago. Yeah, it was this year, but maybe beginning of September.
Okay.
Um, for the state bee inspector for the state of California, or I'm sorry, California, South Carolina, which actually is part of Clemson University. I'm wondering now if he actually is aware of that study, and if he is, he'd probably be a wealth of knowledge. But he's agreed to come on my podcast as well.
Oh, that'd be
So,
great. Yeah.
so if you actually have any biology questions or anything like that, I'd happily ask those questions.
Okay. If I got anything, or I'll try to find that, get it to you, and then we'll kind of if I got any questions, I'll send them to you.
Yeah,
There's yeah, it, when we had a lady on our podcast. See, I was involved with the Be Hooligans podcast for about a year, and there's a guy out of Omaha that goes by Big Bear, and he's a real very knowledgeable beekeeper. Him and JP, Shawee, and we did a weekly podcast for a while there, and we had a lady on that was talking about the truth versus the myths about honey. And here's a thought, and I don't have anything that I could say here, go read this, I'm proving this to be, but you know honey being as medicinal as what it is, we take it, and my argument, which I brought up in the podcast, was why do we take spring honey to fight fall allergies
yeah,
when all those flowers have already, all that's already bloomed and it's gone? So why do we take spring honey to fight fall allergies? Says it's because you can take the pollens in and it helps, but what you're doing is you're actually boosting your immune system with honey. You're not actually fighting the allergy of um, uh, said plant. You're boosting your immune system so that your body doesn't have to fight and get the snot nose because of it. So I kind of like, all right, that makes sense. And she had her research and everything else to go along with it. I wish I could remember her name. I would love to direct your listeners to her. So forgive me that I don't. And if she ever runs across this, forgive me that I can't remember your name.
yeah.
But
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say that there's some merit to that, because I've actually read some, actually quite a few research papers and all that kind of stuff having to do with the the benefits of the immune system coming from honey. But at the same time, your body starts building up a tolerance by micro injecting uh, the thing that it is that you're allergic to
Right.
into your body as well. So a stronger immune system leads to a stronger body, which helps you resist the allergic reaction. But at the same time, you still are not negating the allergic reaction.
Right.
In
Well,
in my opinion, I guess. But
right. And a weird example of what you're saying is I know a guy that was, and we all are, allergic to poison ivy.
yep.
But he would have deathly allergic reactions to poison ivy, and the way he was trying to, and this was my medicinal medicine guy, he actually would go out and he would collect poison ivy. I don't know if it was the root or if it was the leaves, but he would take and dry it, dehydrate it, crush it up into a powder, and he would put just a minute amount of that into just about everything he drank, and he was injecting it to a degree into his system so that his system could learn how to fight that. And that's been rumored to be happening, for the course of 1,000 years, where kings and leaders would take certain poisons just by the just micro drop, and then add it to their wine or whatever, so that way if they were ever poisoned, it wouldn't have the effects of killing them. And I guess that's where the idea come from. But I mean, he ain't dead yet, so
I was about to ask if he's still around. I don't think
yeah,
I have the cojones to try that, but to more power to him.
yeah,
He's got a lot more gall than I do.
yeah. Well, you were asking about the whole deal with CCD, colony collapse disorder, and the pesticides and everything else. And I'll say this. I talked with a guy that's up in Indiana. His name's Tim Ives, and Tim has got bees that set out on apple orchards, I believe is what it was, or he's got them next to farm field, but his bees sit kind of close to where the apple trees are. And we kind of had this discussion, and it kind of made sense after I seen something later on. Is that I give you the analogy of this. You've got a big farm pasture across the street from your house, and they grow corn. Okay, well, the corn that's out there is a GMO that it is not supposed to be able to die from Roundup being sprayed on it. So they can go out there and they can spray all the Roundup they want, and the corn's not going to die because of how they manufacture that seed. But the the amount that 99% of that field is getting is the full dose of that said um, weed killer. Well, when that tractor goes to make that turn kind of somewhere around in that field, you're going to see that there's one little area right up by the road or in a curve that has got a lot of grass still grown up in it. And that's that 1% that when that tractor made the turn, that little corner didn't get the full amount of the weed killer. So there's grasses that are right there, or that corn or whatever, that got just enough of a dose to where it could take it in but not kill it. And it's the same thing with bees. There's bees that get put out all over these fields, and they're getting a small percentage of what everything else out there is getting. Okay, and now we're talking bees versus the comb and the honey inside the hive as far as this conversation goes. But the bees are out there, and they may be getting that through drift, but it depends on how much drift they got that day. There's bees that are sitting on fields in Mississippi that I've known to be there for years that are thriving, and they're completely surrounded by farmland that gets sprayed like mad hatters. But why are they not? But why are they not dead? Why aren't they? Why? Now insecticide versus herbicides and everything else. There's a lot of in-depth conversation you can get into this, but it's still has its effects on everything. And once these bees are being exposed to these different things around them, they're going to grow an immunity to it. That's the bee. Now, granted, those bees are going out there and they're foraging on the plants and the things that are in that area that have been tainted because of it, and they've brought it back to the hive. Now they bring that pollen in that's got it's been tainted with herbicide, and they put that pollen up in a cell. Well, now that runs off and goes absorbs into the wax and absorbs into to the honey and all that. So there's exposure limits to everything that's out there, but is it enough to kill something? Um, I can't tell you, because nobody can tell that I'm aware of what actually causes these things. But it's kind of funny because my thought on it is, how long have we actually had real serious problems with Varroa mites? Before Varroa, it was tracheal mites. Well,
Hmm.
you know, here's a weird example. You got 25 hives sitting next to my house, and one or two of them are weak where the other ones are thriving. Is it because there's a problem with the queen? Is there a problem with the bees? Or was there a problem because they have mites? Or did they just get robbed out? And their numbers are reduced, and they could not recoup off those numbers. So now this hive is weak with not a lot of food stores because they were robbed, and the numbers are low because of fighting off all the other intruders, and they didn't recover. Or do we have some kind of a radio frequency near a cell phone tower, a power line, or a chemical exposure that has caused them to run off? they look at it straight up from the standpoint of saying, well, there's 5 more over here that are fine, but why did this one? What happened to this one?
Hmm.
And the guys at the colleges can figure all that out. They can study that in depth and test things and try to figure it out. But I tell people as students when we go over this, you are literally trying to keep a bug in a box with the knowledge base of a backyard beekeeper. There are people that go to school for 4 years to get a piece of paper that says they know enough about that insect that they can now spend the rest of their life learning more and more about it. Meaning they went to school for 4 years, got a college degree that says they knew the minimum standard enough about that bug to now go to the next level and get a job spending the rest of their life learning about them and testing or theorizing or doing whatever and trying to create either a better bug, a better scenario, or whatever. And how do we compete with that in our level? It's like commercial beekeepers. How can you, as a backyard beekeeper, um, put yourself in the same management practices as that of a commercial beekeeper? There are things that commercial beekeepers do, like split the stew out of their hives and throw sugar water on them mixed with corn syrup, just to keep them fed, because the hives are so weak they can't go out and forage. But we took one hive, we split it 5 times, we threw 4 more queens in with them, we threw a bunch of sugar water on top of them, and now we're going to expect these things to produce us 500 gallons of honey by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Well, the only problem is that those commercial guys have the next 2 or 3 steps in place. They're taking those bees and they've boosted that with pollen patties and this and that, blah blah, and then they've put them on a huge nectar source, and they've allowed them to build rapidly where we are missing steps in there possibly, and now our bees are dying because we keep throwing sugar water. There was a guy on Facebook here the other day, and this drives me nuts. He's been feeding his bees since March. This is now September.
What?
He says, he said, I've been feeding my bees since March, and they're not really taking much of the sugar water now. Is it okay if I take the sugar water off?
He should have taken the sugar water off a lot. Well, was this a new hive?
I didn't get down into it. I'm going to assume that he got a package or something, maybe a swarm in March. Who knows? But
Well,
he's
if
been
you get a
feeding his
package
bees
in
since March.
March, yeah, if you get a package in March, maybe a little bit of feeding, but this is just my experience, and it varies. You talk to 100 different beekeepers, you're going to get 100 different answers. But in my experience, they don't stay on that sugar water for very long. They're able to go out and forage, and they usually sustain themselves pretty easily
Right.
during
But
that time of the year.
yeah, and there's so many questions that one statement on Facebook, one question asked on Facebook can open up a whole can of worms as far as how many more questions. But, you know, that right there is a perfect example of I had a lot of money and I had a desire, and I did this, and I watched a couple of YouTube videos, and I'm in a Facebook group, and I and I expect this. I went down the same route. I didn't know how much there was involved in beekeeping. I didn't know how ask one beekeeper or ask 10 beekeepers and get 12 answers. You know, I didn't know all that, and I've learned and worked through it over the years. There's a lot of good beekeepers out there that I've grown with, and they're booming. One of them has turned himself into a commercial beekeeper, and he was calling me asking questions back 5-6 years ago about how to do bee removals, and now he's a commercial beekeeper with about 500 hives.
Wow.
And he's growing just nonstop. So
So in other words, you're saying
um,
take your advice.
no, what I'm saying is he you know he 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 had a goal. He had an end place he wanted to be, and he put everything into to learning how to get there. He didn't just turn around and say, I'm going to go buy 500 hives, put bees in them,
Yeah.
and I'm going to be a commercial beekeeper tomorrow. I mean, he learned the craft. He learned his stock and how to keep that stock happy and healthy and how to make it work, and he grew with it. I will say the one thing that I hate the most about beekeepers is I got a beekeeping kit for Christmas. Can't wait to get my first bees. They put them bees in the box, and then you know they that's never enough. The two hives the first year is a great startup, great to start up, but we get that bug so bad, the passion so quick that it's like we'll never turn down going to get a swarm or um, I if I could make the rule book, I would tell people you need to learn and understand bees and how they set their home up, how they act, how they everything the most that you can before you ever go start cutting a hole in somebody's wall.
Oh yeah.
That's a whole nother, it's a whole nother animal when you get into that. Not that I'm trying to deter people from being bee removers, because I am one. That's not what I'm saying. But, you know, it's a whole nother animal when you get into removing bees versus keeping them happy in a box. But that's
Well,
another.
that's how I started out. I was um, I really didn't know much at all. And so I talked to a local bee store and I was like, hey, how can I get into this? How can I get bees? And, all that kind of stuff. And they were like, well, you can order packages, you can, and they're telling me all the different ways. And they were like, well, you can do cutouts. And I'm like, what's a cutout? They told me. And I was like, hey, that's cool. And I started looking on YouTube and, I saw JP and, you know, all these, different people doing it. And I was like, that looks really cool. So I put an ad on Craigslist and next thing I know, I get 2 calls for removing bees for free. And then I didn't even have the equipment. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh man, now what do I do? So I had to source the equipment really quick. And man, I fell on my face hardcore in the beginning because I had no idea how fast they would build up. I didn't have nearly enough boxes. I didn't have any of that stuff. So I learned the hard way and at the detriment of my bees, unfortunately. Um, because I didn't do nearly enough research or talk to enough people or whatever before I started doing it. And after that first year, it was a real crash course in what I needed to change. Um, and it yeah, I'm with you. I would definitely urge people, hey, look, start really slow. Do not start out just taking them out of somebody's wall. That's I would say more of an advanced thing to do.
Well, the I man, I hate referring back to all the Facebook posts. I'm actually involved in a lot of different groups on Facebook. I sit back and I watch and I'm quiet because there's a lot of people that have good information. There's a lot of people out there that just are parrots that repeat something they read the day before. You get to know you get to know good people out there. Um, I've gotten to a point to where I have my glad to helps versus my frustrations when it comes to some of these boards, but the all said and done with, it gets frustrating to see the good intentions turn into failures or problems for people on, that are posting stuff. One example is, and if it was somebody here in Alabama, and if you're listening to this podcast, and I hope you are, I'm not calling you out, but what bothers me is there's not really a school out there that you can go learn bee removals, and it is a learn as you go, but you need to understand how bees react, and things they do before you just jump in and start cutting holes in people's walls. But this person, and had a helper with, as far as the pictures went, they got called to go get bees out of an abandoned house. Well, abandoned house is great to start with, because if there's nobody that's right there immediately in that house that's going to get hurt if you screw up, then that's great, because the number one goal as a bee remover, you're there to remove a problem.
Yep.
Secondary and most equally is to save some bees, but your primary is to remove a problem. So you better be professional and you better know what you're doing when you go to remove a problem and not become part of the problem or make the problem worse because you've just now exposed the whole interior of a house by cutting a hole in the wall. Well, they ended up going to this house and they found where the bees were at and they cut a hole in the wall and there was something that was there. It was like a sink or something in this room, and they've cut all that out, moved it all out. Well, I'm looking at this picture of this hole that they've got cut, and it was just bees in between two studs. And somehow or another, their post was, I saw the post where they had posted that they went and they did this and that, blah blah blah. The next day, another post comes up says, "Hey, when anybody want to go and finish this job, we can't go back today, but there's plenty of bees. The queen must have ran up in between somewhere because we don't we've only got in our vac box a pound or two of bees, and there was millions of them, and we got 50 pounds of comb and honey out, blah blah blah, but we don't know what to do." And that right there just absolutely just blew my mind because that go back to what I said, know what bees are going to do, but not only that, but there's things that you over through experience and and understanding your bees will know how to react when that happens. Do you have to open up another void, which they should have done, um, wait it out? Bees are going to come back to where their hive was at
Mm-hmm.
in that void. And I guarantee you, by now, the bees are probably restarting back up and everything else. But thank God that wasn't a situation where there were people inside that house. Those are some of the things that can happen.
Oh yeah, you leave
So,
bees exposed in a house like that, you're asking for it.
right, and we'll see. Here's what made it worse. I hope they covered that hole up they put in that wall because now you've opened up the inside of that wall. Bees are going to go flying around in that room, and the first thing they're going to do is go to light
Yep.
all the windows that are in that room. So now they're going to come back and probably have a mass die off of bees because they had that wall opened up. The bees came back out to try to salvage what little bits of honey they could that were still up in the cracks and crevices and on the floor and all the mess. And they didn't know where to go, but they ended up flying to a window because that's what they know to do, go to
Yep.
light. And there's going to be a mess over there. And I hate that.